All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, after being swept by the Los Angeles Dodgers during Memorial Day week, things were looking bleak for the New York Mets. The Mets were 11 games under 500 as they were just 9 and 19 during the month of May. But as the calendar has shifted to June, the Metropolitans have been a different team. New York has won 15 of 21 games so far this month, and the team that was left for dead just several weeks ago now has some juice. Okay. The Mets have been on a roll as they've won 11 out of their last 13. And in the process, they look like a completely different team. The bats have come alive for the Amazons, and they're getting production up and down this lineup. You just look at the Mets since June 12th, they've scored at least 10 runs in a game 5 times. The 2 game set that they just finished at home with the New York Yankees, they outscored their crosstown rivals in the 2 games 21-9. You look at this lineup right now, the Mets have finally decided to give Mark Vientos some at bats. He was tearing it up in the minors. They would bring him up and not play him, and now they're giving this young man reps. And so far this month already, 6 home runs. Okay. And the Yankees, I guarantee you, they know who Mark Vientos is. Having a veteran in the lineup like JD Martinez. And for me, if you look at JD Martinez's career, for the most part, every single place that he's been, he's produced. Arizona, Houston, Detroit, the Dodgers, the Boston Red Sox, and now the Mets. And for me, it's one of those things. I said a couple of years ago that the Mets should have gotten JD Martinez, and now, after being a late spring training signing, coming up to the 25-man roster late, not really late, but after the start of opening day, and now he's gotten it going, and that is a big dividend for the Mets. You're seeing guys like Francisco Alvarez, pardon me, Francisco Lindor. I'll get to Francisco Alvarez in a moment, but Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso get going. And of course, I was one prior to the season saying I expected Pete Alonso to have a big year as he's heading into his walk year in free agency. And now he's starting to get it going. And if Big Pete can get it going for the Mets in the middle of that lineup, that's going to be a big thing. Same thing with Lindor at the top of that lineup. But then getting back now to Francisco Alvarez and the return of the Mets young catcher, the Mets are a different team. Okay, when Alvarez is behind the plate, the pitchers are pitching better. The lineup, everything is just clicking better for this team. And I mean, you look at the Mets; they've been a better team, a different team since Alvarez's return. They've also been a different team since that team meeting several weeks ago. And now, what looked like at one time it was going to be impossible has become possible very quickly with this team as they've gotten back to 500. And now that they've gotten back to 500, you know, it can change the thought process of a team because now if you're the Mets, you're 39 and 39. Clearly, you've got 84 games left, but now you can think about possibly being a buyer prior to the trade deadline as opposed to being a seller. And of course, we talked about it before where the Mets had a very important stretch earlier in the season playing the likes of the Braves and Phillies, and it didn't work out for them. And they really spiraled downward after that. This has been an important stretch for the Mets recently as well because we've seen how bundled and jumbled it was and it has been in that wild card race in the National League. And recently, the Mets have beaten some of the teams in contention with them. San Diego Padres are still ahead of the Mets, but the Mets took a 3 game set at home from the Padres earlier this month. Of course, an interleague series with the Texas Rangers, they took 2 out of 3, but then taking 2 out of 3 with the Chicago Cubs. And my point is this: it's still jumbled up in that wild card race, especially the race for the final wild card spot in the National League. but there's a little bit of separation now because you about a week or so ago, you had about 5 or 6 teams separated by a game. Now, the Mets are looking right down the Padres for the last spot. They're a game and a half back. Then you have the Pittsburgh Pirates 2.5 games back. The Diamondbacks are 3 back, and then you got the Giants and Nationals both 3.5 back before the Cubs and Reds are 4.5 back. But nonetheless, the Mets' recent hot streak has changed the tenor around this team, and now you can sit back if you're the Mets and say, "Hey, let's see how the first half of this season finishes. Can we keep this momentum going?" And now a team that looked like they were going to be ready to throw in the towel and have themselves another good old fashioned clearance sale. Maybe they're looking to add on some more freight to this club prior to the trade deadline this summer. You look at it; it's an interleague series this weekend for the Mets at home when they host the Houston Astros. But you got two of the hottest teams in baseball right now. The Astros, of course, they started off slow. They just got back to 500, as did the Mets. And the bottom line is one of these clubs at the end of this weekend is going to be above 500. Okay. That's just the way it is. So it's an interleague series, but if you're the Mets, you still want to keep the momentum going against a hot club in the Astros. But then you've got 7 with the Washington Nationals prior to the All Star break. And the Nationals are right behind the Mets in the National League East, a young team that is starting to figure it out. And that's going to be some interesting competition there for the Mets. They've got 4 at the Pittsburgh Pirates, and then they finish up with 3 against the Colorado Rockies at home. And of course, anybody knows the Rockies have just mailed it in. But if you're the Mets, you want to try to finish on the top side of 500 now. You've gotten back to the 500 mark, which has been big for this team because they haven't been there since early in the season. You've got to go back to the end of April, actually, to find the last time that the Mets were at 500. They've gotten there now. And, I'm going to stick with what I said before when the season started. I'm going to stick with what I said when the Mets were in their funk. And what that is this: this is going to be an up and down year for the Mets. They're going to have highs, they're going to have lows. Uh, but it's one of those where, because I feel like they are a 500 team, the Mets they have the potential to win 82 or 83 games with this team. But with what we have seen in recent years, with that additional wild card spot, you don't need to go out there and win 95 games necessarily to get into the postseason and make some magic happen. Look at the Diamondbacks last year. Look at the Phillies the year before. And it's one of those, if you're the Mets, just try to find a way to get in and anything can happen. And it looks like it's going to be one of those years where maybe 83, maybe 84 wins get you that last wild card spot in the National League. And again, getting back to this wild card race, we're starting to see a little bit of separation, okay? But with all of that said, with the postseason race in the National League, it's going to be interesting to see which team throws in the towel first as far as, just giving up on being in contention. We know that the Miami Marlins and Colorado Rockies are not going to be players, but the rest of the pack, who's going to be the one to throw in the towel and say we're done? And then on the flip side, who's going to be the first team to go out there to make a move to say, hey, you know what? We're all in on this. One thing we know for sure, Mets team owner Steve Cohen has not been shy about spending money, but this is going to be David Stearns' first trade deadline running the front office for the New York Mets. He's no stranger to this thing, doing it for years with the Milwaukee Brewers. So it's going to be interesting to see what type of spin he can put on it as well. Also, credit to first year manager Carlos Mendoza for keeping the ship level, if you will, for these Mets to get them back to this point. Not saying that the folks in Queens should start making World Series parade plans. Absolutely not. But nonetheless, you got to be happy with what you've seen from this team in comparison to where they were just a couple of weeks ago. Still got plenty of season to go. Don't get me wrong, but these Mets have life, and they're 39 and 39, and you just have to wonder where they could have been without that, bad month. So many, blown leads because of the bullpen. So many times that the bats just weren't coming around and this team wasn't hitting. Now they're clicking on all cylinders. Let's just see how long the Mets can keep it up. But nonetheless, they've gotten back to 500. They've shown a lot of life. They've shown a lot of fight, and they've shown a lot of grit. Let's just see if the Metropolitans are going to be able to keep it going. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365 that you can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.